I do research on sexuality education, and I'm working on a project which is looking at cultural and religious difference in sexuality education in Australia and New Zealand. One of the things I've thought about is pleasure and sexuality education. I'm looking at secularism and sexuality education, and there's this woman called Joan Scott who's got this idea of sexularism, which is sex and secularism put together. And she talks about that because she is really trying to make us aware of how people might assume that the idea that people can enjoy sex in a way that is quite free and quite so it's okay if you want to have sex before marriage, it's okay if you want to be lesbian and gay identified, it's okay if you want to access abortion, that everybody agrees that those things are okay, might be a version of secularism. So it's a way of trying to get us to think that not everybody has to be on the same page around that stuff, which doesn't mean you have to necessarily change your ideas, but to recognise that there's more than one way of thinking about these topics, and that cultural and religious difference are in your classroom, and that you shouldn't be dictating like what the right way of thinking is about these issues, but enable people to have different conversations about, for instance, what it means to be gay and lesbian. Is it admissible in your classroom, for instance, for people to say, I don't think that's okay? Is that always an instance of homophobia? Or might that also be a way of saying, well, this is what I hear at home? So how can you engage in a conversation about different ways of thinking about what it means to be gay in the classroom, or to be a lesbian, and to think about how that is, needs to be informed by the diversity within our community. Teacher education candidates are finding it very hard to say the words gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and intersex doesn't get much mention at all. And that interests me as well, like why is it hard to talk about that stuff in school? So I think, it's one thing to say that we should talk about it in a particular way, but maybe that's going too far down the track. Like how do we even get people to start feeling comfortable like talking about sexual diversity in school? But there's a lot of fear we're finding, and worry and concern that teachers have about raising these issues. They're worried about what parents think, they're worried about what the students might say when they go home, and they're worried about what the principal might say, especially if they're a beginning teacher. So I think that it's really good to be able to talk about that stuff while you're at university, and be able to find other people on staff who you think you can talk to about that stuff, because you're not the first people to have had these concerns and worries. And it's really good to, you can probably be sure that somewhere in the school where you're teaching, other people would have dealt with these issues, and they'll have a sense of the lay of the land of that school. So, thinking about how you can, not isolate yourself from all the different knowledges that exist around sexuality education, both at your university, among your peer group, and in the school context in which you find yourself. One story is not definitive, but it's great to have stories because they teach us about the diversity in our community, and inviting stories in, I think, is a really good thing to do. But also think carefully about how you're going to do that. How am I going to get stories in which aren't then going to be used to undermine particular students? So is there a way that I can get stories and then vet them in particular ways? Not to censor students, but maybe as a way of ensuring that they don't get negative consequences as a result of storytelling that comes from either their parents or themselves.